Hey everybody, this is video number 6 on how to fly RC airplanes. Now, as you can tell, I'm out in my garage right now. I'm doing what I call an annual on my giant scale airplane, which means I go through every bolt nut, the motor mounts, everything. But I just thought I would shoot it from here since I've got everything already out here. Been doing some other videos. So let's dive into this. This one's about landing an RC airplane. Now, that might seem simple, but you know, I have trained a lot of people in my life how to fly model airplanes, and I found out that if I kind of had a certain system to teach them how to fly, it helped make them consistent in the way they flew. So why do we land? Well, it's pretty obvious. It's better to land than to crash, okay? Once we're in the air, we have to land. So I don't know how many times, you know, when I would test a new airplane or I'd be with a student, that getting into the air seemed simple, but they were always scared of not enjoying the flight because they needed to land. So they were always kind of, you know, intimidated, or not intimidated, they just didn't enjoy it because until their airplane that they'd spent either 3 months, 6 months, or a year or 5 years building was safe. The best chance to destroy your airplane is on landing. Okay, if you look at some of the different scales of full-scale airplane where your highest pilot load, there's a little bit of a climb on takeoff. Cruising is pretty much uneventful, and then landing can be 100% of your skills. And taking off, realistically, if you got enough power and you know where to aim the airplane and pull up the elevator, you can take off. It might not be a pretty takeoff, but you have to have skills to land. So let's dive into what happens to your airplane when you're landing. You have to slow the plane down. And when you slow the plane down, it will change your trims. Okay. It will cause, well, it can definitely cause you to stall if you get too slow. It takes more inputs. So when you start to slow down, your inputs, it takes a lot more stick movement. And that's where I've said in other videos, you want your exponentials to come in. Because you still want enough throw to be able to flare it when you land, but you don't want oversensitivity so that right as you're getting ready to touch down, you start to do a pilot-induced oscillation. And the moment you do that, or the moment you just bounce and go back in the air, unless just go around. So I'm going to break this next part into 3 parts. I call the first one, when I teach somebody how to fly, how to land a plane 101, the basics. Fly the plane, don't let it fly you. Okay, I know when I was learning to fly, I just let the airplane kind of take me where it was going, then I'd turn it around. Make sure everywhere you're going with that airplane, you're commanding the airplane. It's called being ahead of the aircraft. Don't be behind the aircraft, which means it's flying you. You should always fly the airplane. Anytime you're going to land, communicate. Let everybody at the field know your intentions. Because the last thing you need is somebody firing up an engine right next to you and getting ready to take off when you could have yelled out loud landing, and they'd be like, okay, we're going to let this person land. Know where your controls are with your eyes closed. And what I mean by that is don't fly, of course, with your eyes closed, but practice with your eyes closed, your radio. Know where your gear is, landing gear switch is. Know where your flap switch is. Know where your trims are. Know where your exponential switch is. Know where everything is on that radio, because if you got to look down, especially if you're getting ready to land. Let's say you're turning downwind to base and you're pulling the angle of attack up because you're pulling that elevator back. You're getting close to a stall, and then you got to look down and fumble around to find your landing gear switch. That's not the way to do it. And then know your plane's limitations. And I'm going to talk about that in the next stage too, but you need to know your airplane. You need to know how it flies. So now the next part I call how to land your RC airplane 201. So we went through 101, now we're in class 201, okay? Master slow flight. You should be able to take any airplane you fly, it be a warbird with a heavy wing load, it be a turbine, whatever you fly, it could be a park flyer. Know how to slow fly that airplane, how to get it really slow where it starts to wobble, okay? Know how to slow fly your airplane, because technically when you're landing, you're almost slow flying your plane if you're landing it right. Master how to use the rudder on the airplane. I don't know how many times I've talked about this, especially in my video about taking off. Know your rudder. I've had a couple of instances where I was slow flying an airplane, and these were my big planes, which do tend to spin pretty easy. And if I wouldn't use rudder, I probably would have spun it to the ground. So I'm slow flying along really slow, and I'm trying to do shallow turns, flying basically with the wing stalled, and then it just dropped on me. And my MSL1 would love to spin. Even though it had that huge vertical stabilizer, it loved to spin. Especially if you like to keep your CG a little aft like I do. I like to keep my CG as aft as possible and the plane still be stable. Practice power on and power off stalls. Now, if you've got an unlimited aerobatic airplane, a power on stall is really hard to happen because if you're full throttle, you can go unlimited vertically. But what I mean by that is fly around about 100 feet in the air, add a little bit of power depending on your airplane. If it's a warbird, add 3/4 power. Start climbing until you feel the plane start to stall. Okay, or let it stall and then fly out of stall. That's a power on stall. In full scale, we do it all the time. It's called a departure stall. We're simulating what happens if we stall the airplane when we're taking off. Full scale airplanes do not have unlimited power unless it's an aerobatic airplane. When I would fly a Cherokee, I go down the runway until about 59 to 63 knots, rotate, climb out at about 70 knots. Okay, I go up to 5,000 feet, pull the nose up, climb out at 70 knots, and then raise the nose or the angle of attack until I get down to about 48 knots, and it really starts to buff it, and then it stalls. I've got the power on. I'm at full power. That's called a power on stall. Okay, so then practice power off stalls, which is just you flying along and you pull the nose up until the plane stalls. So know your airplane. If you know it, you'll be able to land it. Master your flare. I don't know how many times people have oversensitive elevators and you see them just coming down beautiful and you're like, oh my God, they're going to grease it on, and then it goes up 3 or 4 feet. Some people says that's ground effect. It could be. It could be ground effect you're getting into. But I would almost guess if you had a high-speed camera zoomed in, you would see that they were trying to flare it just a little bit more. And with that ground effect coming in, that's what causes you to balloon. So master your flare. Practice, practice, practice. As you know in other videos I said, throw some paper plates out on the field and master landing right at those paper plates every time. Now, if you're flying a tricycle landing your airplane, you may not land full stall. You might land and then let it roll out. If you're flying a taildragger, you really do want it to just touch down right as it's stalling. And that's the safest way to get your plane on the ground. Now look, once you've got 100 or 200 landings, you can do a main wheels landing with a tail dragger and let it go down the runway holding the tail up and then touch it down. That means you have mastered landings. But I'm talking about if you're learning how to fly, how to master that landing. Master dead stick landings. And don't do this with a lot of people at the field, but I've done it a lot where I go up high and I just pull my engine to idle and leave it at idle until I've landed it. On these big planes, you've got to keep the nose down, keep the airspeed up, because the moment you start to flare them, all that airspeed's coming off. Now keep in mind what's happening when you're landing. Okay, I had an instructor teaching me full scale that would always come down to about 2 feet off the ground and chop the power, and the plane would just kind of drop and kind of land. And I'm like, well, can't we do it smoother than that? He goes, no, we're landing. Then once I had my pilot's license, I figured out if I kept my throttle cracked about a 16th or an 8th open, I would come down and actually touch the main wheel down with the engine, still a little bit of power, and then pull the engine to idle, and I would grease it every time. You can do that with a model airplane too. You really do need to learn how to fly in crosswinds. I know we all want to turn into the wind and take off, but if the wind's across your runway, even though you got a wide field, learn to land going down the runway with the crosswind. You can let it crab all the way to the ground if you've got a tricycle gear, and once you land, straighten it up. If you're a tail dragger, you can do your approach in a crab, and then right as you're touching down, push a little bit of rudder in, a little bit of opposite aileron, and you'll be fine. And then master downwind landings. I don't know how many times people get used to the pattern of their field being like a left-hand pattern, and that's all they ever fly. And then out of nowhere, the wind's out of the north, and then they don't want to fly. Well, I don't know how to do a right-hand circuit. And I'm not kidding, there's a lot of people like that. So learn how to land downwind. Now, if the wind's 20 mile an hour, you might tear your landing gear off because your touchdown speed's probably going to be 30 or 40 mile an hour, so be careful. And then I have what I call how to land an RC airplane, the master class. This is the last step, and we'll be done with this video, everybody. Fly your plane so much that you know where the sticks should be. And what I mean by that is I can tell when I'm flying this airplane, when I'm turning from downwind to base, where my throttle is and where my sticks are. And if I feel my stick coming back too far, I naturally add a little bit of power. Keep in mind, when you're turning that downwind to base, a lot of people don't realize when you're pulling back on that stick, you're raising the angle of attack in the turn. And unless you're adding power, you can stall the airplane and crash. I have seen more airplanes destroyed turning from base to final because people see they're overshooting the runway and they keep pulling that stick back and they're not adding power. So think about this the way an airplane flies. If you're flying along level and you start increasing that angle of attack, your airspeed goes down unless you add power. So think about your sticks. If you start pulling back on your stick without adding power, your airspeed will go down. Now, I have telemetry on this airplane. I can actually hear my airspeed dropping. Most model airplanes don't have that. So you instinctively have to understand, if I'm pulling up on my nose, am I adding power? So if you're turning from downwind to base, normally you got enough speed that you've carried because you've come into the downwind kind of fast. But if you've dropped your landing gears and you've dropped your flaps and you're dirty, and you've already slowed the plane down, every time you're pulling back on that stick, you should be adding a little bit of power. Okay? Know how sensitive your controls are. Like I said in my other video about setting up your airplane, please use dual rates or exponentials. Okay? If you've got a plane that you, for some reason, have massive throws and it's a warbird, that sensitivity makes it really hard to land a warbird. Know your personal limitations. I went to a fly-in one time where it was real windy crosswind, and I absolutely knew how to fly my MSL-2 in that crosswind. But everybody else flying was landing going across the runway all over the place. So I opted not to fly, I think only twice that entire day, and people said, "Are you scared of the wind?" I said, "No, I'm scared of everybody else." So I knew my limitations, but I knew that I wasn't going to fly and have to do something crazy with a 78-pound airplane when everybody else is in the air. Could I have flown safely? Sure. Was it worth the risk? Absolutely not. Unless your plane is on fire or your engine has quit, you don't have to land. Go around. Okay? I always go back to my full-scale time. I learned how to fly out of Metropolitan Airport in Fishers, Indiana. And they have a weird runway there that's basically always a crosswind. And we had some kind of really big wind come down out of the north, and we had about a 30-knot crosswind at the airport when I got there. So I had called the Unicom, asked them what the wind was like. They said virtually nobody's landing, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try a couple of approaches. So I went for the runway and absolutely knew I couldn't land the first approach. So I went around again. The next time I did, try to do a no-flap landing and couldn't get the plane to stay over the runway. So I went over to Mount Comfort and landed and fine. A couple of months later, same scenario came up, but I only had about a 18-knot crosswind. And by using no flaps, I was able to land. Keep in mind, most model airplanes don't need flaps to fly at all. They're only there for looks or for scale. So if you've got some big old barn door flaps on an airplane and you've got a crosswind, you might that day decide, let's leave the flaps up and just land in the crosswind. Okay? But you can always go around. Okay? That's so important for you to understand. You don't have to force an airplane down. If you're ever pushing the stick forward to land, you are doing something totally wrong. Okay? Now, if you're dead stick, and you've come in blistering fast, you can do S-turns to slow down, but let's say you come across that runway doing 90 mile an hour and you're dead stick, and you've got to get it on the ground. That will be the only time that you've got to force your plane down. Now I would suck the landing gear up and do a belly landing because the friction is going to stop me a lot quicker than landing on my wheels and getting into a pilot-induced oscillation. But I hope this is informative to you all. I'm trying to kick this up a notch. I got out my lavalier mic out of my attic, so hopefully the audio sounds better this time. Got my first complaint ever. The next video is going to be number 7, and it's going to be about flying twin engine, or I shouldn't say twin, multi-engine, because I've had twin engine, 3-engine, and 4-engine airplanes. And I've got a lot of data to share with you about flying a twin, and I know I'll get a little bit of pushback with people probably saying I'm wrong, and that's fine. But everybody have a great day, rock on, and I'll see you the next time I do a video. Be safe.